Hi, everybody. I hope you and yours are well. Pardon me, I do have a cold. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Emor. This is Avrohom Czapnik from the Jewish Learning Exchange in Los Angeles. A warm welcome to all of you. Parshat Emor has some very important commandments in it, including the mitzvah of making a Kiddush Hashem, which means, the word Kadosh means holy, means Kiddush Hashem means sanctifying God's name, and the negative of not making a Chilul Hashem, not desecrating God's name. Excuse me. My apologies. So what does that entail? So simply put, it means doing things that when people see and they say, wow, that's how a servant of God serves, that's great. Or God forbid the opposite is, oh boy, that's how God's people act, that's not good. So there are many simple examples of what it is. If a person is gracious, kind, friendly, honest in business, greets people first, smiles, these are all ways of making a Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name. Now, many of us assume that the sanctification of God's name has to be in public. And many times it is. The Gemara, the Talmud brings down that from the tribe of Yehuda, Nachshon ben Aminadav was the first one to jump into the sea by the Sea of Reeds before the water split when the Jews left Egypt. And that was a public sanctification of God's name. He had faith that the Almighty would help, and somehow or another they would be saved, and the Egyptians would be drowned or punished. And that was a public Kiddush Hashem. But the Talmud tells us also that there was a private Kiddush Hashem. When Joseph, when he was in Egypt, and the wife of Potiphar was attempting to seduce him, and he maintained his value and didn't give in to her overtures, that was a private Kiddush Hashem, a private sanctification of God's name. And the Rambam, Maimonides, teaches us that any time we're confronted with a test about how we should react, and we choose correctly, even if nobody sees it, that's also called the sanctification of God's name. That's a beautiful idea. So I'm going to take the idea, so yes, there's the obvious public sanctification of God's name when we do nice things to other people, Jews and non-Jews, and there is even a private. I will say one public thing that happened this week that is very special. Yeshiva Torah Semis, where I teach my 5-year-old boys, the entire yeshiva had an audit, if you will, from an organization called WASC, which is Western Association of Schools and Colleges, where it has heads of schools and principals from all different types of schools come and observe and see how is the school doing. Are we living up to the standards of what hopefully we're trying to achieve? And we had one rabbi plus 3 different Christian ladies that were, again, heads of schools in private Christian schools around Southern California. And they were blown away by the yeshiva. They loved the enthusiasm, the amount of knowledge the kids were learning, and how bright the kids were, and I could go on and on. But that was a real Kiddush Hashem, was the sanctification of God's name, because they appreciated how much effort we put into trying to teach the children about Torah and mitzvahs and how to act appropriately. But I'd like to take it a step further. There's another type of Kiddush Hashem that people may not look like as a Kiddush Hashem. Let's say there's a bunch of people in the airport waiting for their flight, and it's time for afternoon services. So they go off to the side, not to bother anybody, and they make a minyan. They do a quorum to have public afternoon services. Now, some people may say, oh, it's embarrassing, the non-Jews are looking at you, what are you doing? But truthfully, that's also a Kiddush Hashem, because you're doing the right thing. Again, as long as you're not disturbing anybody else, and you're not interrupting anybody, but when you do the right thing, even if it looks a little bit odd or funny to other people, that still could be a sanctification in God's name. And then finally, I'd like to share a fascinating story with you. It was actually an article written in First Things by Maureen malarkey, she went with her fiancé to buy a ring to a Jewish jeweler who was a Holocaust survivor. He had the numbers on his arm to prove it. And they decided that they wanted, soon we're going to be reading Megillah Ruth, the story of Ruth. We're going to read it during the holiday of Shavuot. And in it, Ruth tells her mother-in-law, wherever you go, I will go. And they wanted that ring that said that to be the ring that they bought for each other. And the jeweler asked whether they were Jewish or in the process of converting, and they told him, no, we're not. He says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to sell you this ring with a biblical phrase. Now, in today's day and age, she herself writes, I could have made a case out of this, it's Christian bias against Christians, but on the contrary, this is what she wrote. It's very fascinating. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God, is the story of Ruth, is one of conversion that affirms the Jewish nation. It testifies to peoplehood. And the intensity of the story was concerned to honor the sacred core of the text, moved the young couple. They perceived the grace in his refusal. It would have violated the grandeur of them. It was not commitment to another person, but to a covenanted community bound together since the call of Abraham. And they recognized his moral right not to sell them this piece of jewelry. They felt themselves in the presence of one of those borders between Jew and Gentile. And, quote, this is what she said, the day in the diamond exchange we stumbled against the very wall that the man had clung to in the camps. It was the same one that had kept Jewry from disappearing centuries before modern nation states existed. Very powerful idea. This woman had the sensitivity to realize that it's his money, it's his business. He wants to sell the ring, he wants to make the sale, but he felt, no, this verse represents connection to peoplehood, and she appreciated that. So when we think about Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name, definitely we should think about how we are perceived in public. Be polite, be nice, hold the door open, welcome people, smile, be honest, all of those things, but also not to be afraid to do the right thing, because that's also sanctification of God's name, even if not everybody always understands it. May we be a holy people and sanctify God's name and have a wonderful, fantastic Shabbos. All the best.